Welcome to the Wise and Happy Life podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern science, and mindfulness, philosophy, and happiness practices blend with neuroscience, compassion, and common sense. Hosted by Bob Martin, meditation mentor, happiness coach, trial lawyer, and entrepreneur. This podcast explores how to live with grace, presence, and purpose in a complex world.
Hello, good people, and welcome to another episode of A Wise and Happy Life. And today we have a guest in the studio with us, Tom Meyers. And as you know, before we get started, I always like to tell a little story, kind of set the stage for the conversation. And I want to let you know that I didn't grow up in a home that was religious much. My folks came from Eastern Europe. My dad was Hungarian royalty, and when the Bolsheviks invaded Hungary, they wiped out all of his ancestors, and my mom was Roma Gypsy. And you know what? Everybody in the world wiped them all out. And so they just came to a conclusion that there couldn't be a God worth worshiping. So I grew up without any kind of religious training. That came later in my life. But I remember when I was about 14, I was reading a science fiction story by Isaac Asimov called The Last Question. And in that story, it talked about entropy. And entropy could be defined either as the gradual running down of the universe or the physical law that things tend to fall into states of disorganization unless acted upon by an outside organizing force. And so I went to my father and I asked him, Dad, the universe seems like it's pretty well organized. And what do you think is the organizing force that keeps it from falling into disorganization? And he just looked at me and in his Hungarian Dracula-like accent said, "What a silly, silly question to be asking." And that's all I got from him. So it started a whole year's journey. A lot of it supported by the concepts in science fiction. And science fiction is always looking at the future. And some people even say that if you can imagine it, you can create it. And our guest today, Tom Meyers, is the very living example of if you can imagine it, you can create it. Because he's the author of Futurize Yourself. He's an osteopath, and this is his world of looking at creating ourselves into the future and then making it happen. So, Tom, if I describe that accurately, let me know and say hello to the folks and tell us a little bit about how you came to this idea of futurizing yourself.
Hello, Bob, and thank you for allowing me on the show. And hello, everyone. Yeah, from Brussels, Belgium. There is a small detail that I do like to point out. That okay, you can imagine everything, but you cannot be everything, right? I think we have to. If we stand in front of the mirror and I say, I want to fly, you'll never fly because it's not in your potential. And I think that's the missing link somewhere. One, many people are imagining things or want to be things, but they never looked at their potential, or what I call your DNA for your future, which is what you want to feel, what are your aspirations, and what is your potential. And DNA is so beautiful as a word because it's, you can do it as an acronym, does not alter. So does not alter means that what you have since birth and that you will die with. From that point, from when you start to acknowledge that you have a DNA, that you have something that does not alter, then you can start imagining the future more accurately and actually become it when you invest your time into it. And that is the difference. And that is what I did somewhere unknowingly 25 years ago.
Yeah,
the only thing I wanted to do.
I completely am on board with that. It reminds me of a story that I read in Mad Magazine once, and it was stories that don't end the way you think they will. And it was about this very small 5-foot nothing man who weighed 140 pounds, and it was his dream to go and fight a heavyweight battle in the ring, to box a heavyweight battle. And so he trained and he trained and he trained and he worked and he worked and he became muscular and the like. And then he went in and he met the 240-pound champ who beat the crap out of him because he weighed 120 pounds and he was 5 foot tall. So
right,
you,
yeah, and that's
yeah,
that's
right.
it. And it's I think many people live on metaphors that are, when you look at them, they're actually, they're all part of a truth, but not the truth. And that's very dangerous, I think, because then we are at the end, at the end of our lives, you say, oh, I tried, and I never got anything, and everything went my way. Well, maybe it's not that what it's supposed to be. Maybe you interpreted it wrongly. So we have metaphors are great, but obviously misleading. And I don't think I know everything, but if I look back at my 25 years, that what I imagined, indeed, I've been able to realize and make into an ongoing reality. But the fact is that it started all with a personal crisis. I was trained as a chef, had been working in hotels, restaurants, traveled around the world, and then ended up in 1998 in running a charcuterie shop, so selling cheese and wine in a very small place. And it was a great idea that my friend had suggested because he had a shop selling charcuterie and cheese, was very successful. And he had built it up over 8 years while I was meandering around the world, traveling, doing this and that. And he wanted to expand and saw me as a candidate for this expansion. And I thought, wow, the universe has delivered me this present. And of course, I'm going to do that, because I saw in him the success. He had, a beautiful house, he had the cars, he had the motorbike, he had the esteem in the society, and I had nothing. I just had experience, but nothing really to show for it. And so I went for it. And on 9/9/99, I opened this shop. And 2 months later, I was suicidal depressed. And it just was that I felt imprisoned in these four walls. Also, it wasn't working out straight away. I had never thought about that you have to build up a business. I thought, like my friend, I would start where he was at that moment, straight away success. And luckily, the pharmacist, a lady who lived a couple of doors down from my shop, and who I'd been talking to for the first time in my life, I was talking to somebody about my problems. And she came in one day with a note, with a little piece of paper, a name and a phone number. And she just said, this person will help you. And I looked at it, and who is this? And yes, she's an astrologer. What, we're in 1999, astrology, that's for desperate people. I don't want anything to do with that. And a month later, I was sitting behind the astrologer's desk, desperate, because, in the months from, so in November, I started having these suicidal tendencies and with the depression. So it took me another couple of months before she came in, and then still going, but everything was just going downhill. Anyway, this lady just never talked about my future, never talked about what I was going to be. She just coached me with a lot of questions, asking the right questions, right? She had to analyze, what are you doing here? And I think well, isn't that what you're supposed to tell me? That's why I'm here. You tell me what I'm doing here and what I need, but nothing of that. She was also a very scary woman. I was really intimidated by her, but that was exactly what I needed to overcome a lot of limiting beliefs. And basically, I said, look, one part of myself is going into a sort of anti-clockwise direction, and otherwise it's going clockwise direction. And so there is a conflict between these two things I feel inside of me, and what I want is harmony, that these two parts go into one direction in harmony. And says, okay, tell me your story. So I told me her story. But then she came up with questions, and 3 questions as homework. And I had to look at people and what did I admire them, then why people came to me, and also what I had done to say from, oh, I wish I could do this forever. So there is like a
Okay,
sort of a
wait.
mirror
Hold on a
effect.
second. Hold on a second. Let's just pause a second and
Sure.
and take those questions one at a time, just for a few seconds. The first one is, what do I admire about other people? Right.
Yeah.
The second one was,
What do they admire about me? So why do people come to me and not my friends?
and the third one,
What had I done where I felt from, oh, I wish I could do this forever?
so how did you respond to those questions? I don't mean literally, how did you respond to those questions, but emotionally, what did that open up for you?
Well, I thought it was bonkers. Why do I talk about that? You know, what's the importance of this? You again, a complete rejection, and you go home with that, and you're just, you know, they're sitting in your drawer for about a couple of weeks. But I had an appointment a month later, and I was intimidated by her, so I thought, I better do my homework. And so one day I was sitting down then with these questions in front of me, and I say, okay, what do I admire in my friends that are around me? And then it started to dawn on me that, you know, I do admire them. I do admire them for their communication skill. They always had something to say. They were like walking dictionaries. They had the best jokes like this, and I would have them 5 days later. And I thought, hey, that's funny. In friend A and friend B, in fact, I admired the same thing. They're both like that. And okay, so I wrote that down. Then the second question was, oh, people seem to always come for me for their problems. It's like I'm a bin bag for problems. You just go to Tom, chuck it on him, and then just leave free and liberated. And I never saw people do that to my friends. I also realized that I had been the sort of a psychologist for my mom from the age of 14, which is I don't recommend to anybody. And so I wrote all of that down. Also, you know, I'm a bin bag for people's problems, and I really saw that in a very negative way. And what I had done, of course, the traveling, that was something that I had done that really was for me like evidence that I was in my element. Also, in the months before, I had created a workshop of wine tasting, how to taste wine. So I went to do the research about how to do that. This is before internet was, you know, we're talking about the year 2000, right? So internet was not really what it is today. So you had to have books.
You actually had to do research with books instead of asking ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, and then I had to prepare it, and then learning my talk, and then I gave it, and it was like flow, right? I was worried about it, very anxious, and then I started speaking, and an hour later I stopped. I never looked at my papers. It was a flow, and people were saying, Tom, you know, how many times have you done this? This is the first time. No, that can't be. You know, you must have done this before. I said, no, honestly, this is the first time. So this is, you know, this is when I started to realize hey, I like this, right? I like this research. I like this, you know, this talking, this teaching people. And from that, when we are analyzing that, yes.
So you found that what you admired in other people were their communication skills and their people skills, their social skills. What you admired, or what people seemed to admire in you, is the fact that you were a good friend and a shoulder to come to and to share with, and that you were, I guess that speaks to the fact that you were open and accepting and non-judgmental. Those were but you didn't identify those particular characteristics. You just knew people come and they seem to want to share their problems with me. And then you went and you actually did, by communicating and doing your workshop, you actually did what you admired in other people, and you found, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, but that I didn't realize at that
You
moment.
didn't
Right?
realize
It's
it at the
only
time.
no. It's only when the questions came and were discussed
Uh-huh.
were with Elena that she pointed it out to me.
Uh-huh.
Because
Cool.
I had not seen the link. I also had never really realized that I was this, this shrink for everybody. It's only when she asked me the question and that I started to think about them that I suddenly saw these elements in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But they were always there. But they're just, not important. You just don't look at these things.
Let me ask you something. Do you think that so the people that are listening, they just heard the 3 questions. And of course they can sit back and reflect on those questions and think about them and say, well, you know what, and ask themselves the same questions. But do you think that it was the reflection on it, or was it the interplay that you had with another human being that actually brought it up to the surface? How important was it to have her as a mentor at that time?
Very important. I could not have done it without it. I would not have had the questions, right?
Well, yeah,
And
but
I
I'm
would
saying
never.
even if you had the questions, do you think that it would have been your reflection would have been enough, or was it the addition of the interplay with her that really brought
Yeah.
everything to the surface?
For me, it was definitely the interplay because
Mm-hmm.
she taught me to view things with a different perspective.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think everybody needs that.
Mm-hmm.
Some people can do the work just by answering the question and seeing beyond them. We're also 20 years, 25 years on. Life is very different. We have read different things. We know different things. So for some people, it might be enough. But for me, definitely, it was the interplay between her and me that
Yeah.
was
Well,
crucial. And I always say, people, please get help.
yes, my experience is that there's no substitute for a teacher or a mentor or someone at least to have a conversation with, because we're always looking from the inside out, and it's hard to see ourselves from the outside in.
Yes.
Matter of fact, if I could just take a little thing here, one of the meditations that I teach people after they've been introduced is a meditation I call Seeing Yourself Through the Eyes of a Loved One, where you actually imagine bringing your consciousness over to a loved one and looking back and looking at yourself. It is kind of maybe a substitute for having that person say to you how they see you, but we can imagine it. We have that ability. And so I think the interplay is just something that's really important. But you go on now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with this interplay, so when I went back and discussed that what I had answered in sort of storytelling writing, from that she started to help me see and distill the essences. And the essence is that she said there is a therapist, communicator, teacher, researcher, and traveler in you. And then she pointed that out in the astrology chart.
Uh-huh.
And that's basically what I'm born with, but I did not know. I did not realize this. And then after having done that, she said, okay, I got another question for you for the next time. And she said, now imagine an ideal day in 10 years time. Really, I have problems now. My business is failing. I'm going down. Do I really need to think about the future? This is bonkers. Again, a lot of resistance. And again, it took me 3 weeks before I even looked at that question. But then when I sat down, I said, okay, let's do this, right? I found that I have this potential. This potential is then confirmed in my astrology chart. So that means that this is the archetypes that I'm born with and I will die with. Now, if I have this and other people have other set of potential, isn't that then important? So I started to realize that evolutionary wise, this must have meaning, because otherwise it would have probably faded out of our existence. So what could this then become in the future? And that's how I answered that question. So I just took these words, these archetypes, and threw it into the future and started with, I wake up in the morning and I created another story. And there is one phrase that I summarized it with, and that is, I wake up in the morning and I'm a therapist who has developed his own approach, who has written a book about it, and is asked around the world to give presentations and workshops. So it doesn't say osteopathy, it doesn't say what about that approach that I'm developing, but it's a phrase that, when we go back to what I said earlier on about DNA for the future, does not alter. I will, the end of my life, even it's 100, 150 or 70, it doesn't matter. That will always be there. The expression of that will change, right? So today I'm an therapist, osteopath, right? And I have written already several books, and I'm teaching around the world the reset approach. But when I'm 100, maybe in a retirement home, I'm still a therapist, but maybe listening to the nurses and their complaints, because they will find me anyway, as people have always found me. So and then I think but suddenly I'm confronted, and this is only recently in the last 5 years or so that I'm seeing this DNA structure into this, but also it's going with genetics and epigenetics. Genetics is the code. Epigenetics says from behavior and environment stimulates the code so it expresses in A, B, or C. And so I'm having this DNA for the future, which is the same rules of genetics and epigenetics, but then in a personal development domain. And this is Futurize Yourself.
So you have you speak to and use the term evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah.
And so if I, the way that maps on when I hear it, I think that, for example, when we spent 1.7 million generations as hunter-gatherers, we developed and we evolved into that lifestyle, and we haven't really evolved out of it yet. In that lifestyle, we have a hard physical life. We eat very calorie non-dense foods like wild onions and berries and things like that. And today, we can go into a McDonald's and have a Happy Meal, and we get more fat, sugar, and salt than we would have got in the jungle, in a month. And so no wonder we're having an epidemic of obesity. So to me, that would be like an evolutionary mismatch. We developed a desire, a drive to have fat and sugar because the forest doesn't provide a lot of it. But today we have a lot of it. And so there's a mismatch between what we are evolved to be and the culture and the society we live in. Am I on point here? Is that the idea?
Yeah, and I hadn't really seen it that way, but it's true. Evolutionary mismatch comes from my work as an osteopath with stress-related ailments. That the stress response, is evolved over millions of years, and in the last 12,000 years hasn't really made an upgrade, or has not really evolved, because 12,000 years is just a couple of seconds on a 24-hour clock of our evolution, and is now becoming a problem because our stress response is responding with a physical approach, like to run after food or away, not to be food from an animal, for I don't have internet, but in a way, what you're saying is correct as well, is that our biological evolution has always been steered by our DNA going and pushed forward into direction unknown. But today, our environment is changing so fast that there is a conflict between biology and culture. Biology is slow, our environment is fast, and this conflict is creating illness and unhappiness, and it's creating a lot of stress in us, and that stress also creates a lot of ailments and kills people, basically. So our evolutionary our biological evolution is in mismatch with our evolution of our environment, our culture. And so the solution is that instead of it being autonomous, that we are going to say from, okay, maybe we should do conscious evolution. And conscious evolution is from where do we want to go? What do we need, let's say 50 to 100 years from now, and start working towards that. So what do we need? And then we have this beautiful word, eustasis, because that's what we want. Eustasis is the good balance between biology and culture.
Or between man and nature, right?
Between man and nature, but in basically is that we are in harmony with our environment. However that environment is going to change due to AI, robotics, and whatever. So what do we need to stay in good balance? So in a dynamic balance, because it's not some state fix. No, it's about adaptation. It's about being able to adapt and manage change. So what do we need? But also, what do we have that we can develop to fulfill that need without becoming a robot, without becoming technology, without interfering with our biology? And so that's why we also need this DNA for the future. And at the same time, we need to imagine on a societal level, what do we need as human beings to stay healthy and, to adapt and manage change and to flourish and thrive. And then we can start adapting our behavior and our environment towards it. And then we also have the opportunity to say to technology, this is where we're going. And you can support us in that today, because we don't know what we want. We don't know where we're going. Technology is just like a wild card taking us in any single direction. And that gives Grace more anxiety because we don't know where it's taking us. Like
Okay,
we
so
need to take the lead.
let me just back up, because what you're talking about is multi-layered, right? I mean, but it's almost got as many facets as a diamond. There's so many aspects to what you're talking about. But one of the things that comes to my mind when you say that is for man to be able to live in harmony with his culture. Well, what we have developed because of the environmental evolutionary mismatch is we've developed a profit-driven, power-driven, hierarchical way of governing ourselves. And if you just take one aspect of that, let's say the meat industry. Well, I mean, I love a good steak just as much as the next guy. So don't let me don't say this isn't coming from a vegan, la la kumbaya person that only eats vegetables. I mean, I do like a good steak, but the fact of the matter is that when we are growing, 12 pounds of vegetable protein to create 1 pound of meat protein, when we're deforesting jungles in the Amazon to make for more grazing land, when we're devoting so much of our arable land to feeding cows, we're actually destroying the earth, and we're not living in balance with the environment. But it's driven by, but to ask the people who are the CEOs of this industry to give up their profit and for them to take the hit that would be necessary to get back in balance is a big ask. So
what if you didn't have to ask that from them?
Well, how do you get them to the point where you don't have to ask them?
Because it's, we are having this view that it's against economy. That's what I'm saying, but it's not against economy at all. But it will drive them in another type of economy that is as profitable.
Oh yeah.
So it's just about seeing it in a different way. Because if we are going to imagine the future and what we need, well, there is still things that are commercializable. It's just a bit different. So I'm not, as I'm also with the reset approach that I developed, I'm integrative. I'm somebody who says okay, I'm not against you, and I'm not alternative nor complementary. I'm just, what I'm saying, implement it in whatever you're doing, and you will see that the profits are still there. You will not lose anything if that is your goal. But as well as people, we must take more responsibility.
For ourselves.
People that do end up into obesity, well, or many people of us, and you see that in portions in restaurants, especially in for example in Germany, I've seen this. Why does my steak or my schnitzel have to be 35 centimeters wide? I can't even eat that much, right? So the portions are just so huge, we don't need that, right? Reduce that portion, and so that you need less meat, that there is less waste, and so forth. But it doesn't mean that you have to cut the prices necessarily.
Yeah. No, I understand. So, I mean, I think the important thing for all of us to take away is that maybe reforming the beef industry is outside my personal capacity, but reforming my eating habits is not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if enough of us reform our eating habits, then the industry will reform.
Yeah. And remember that there is this word called holon. Holon means that we are as much a part as the whole at the same time. If we're waiting for society to change, well, we are society. We are the individual that makes society. And so there is a lot more that we can do as individuals. And again, if we go into more of potential, like I focus on my potential and making that a change in the world and globally. And it's because that is my domain in which I can make a difference. And that is what we all, in a way, have. It's not necessarily to do, but have to think about what is my responsibility within this whole. And yes, we do need to change, and we do need to rethink a lot of things. And our wiring has been a bit tampered with due to social media, due to marketing, and so many things. But at the end of the day, we are responsible.
We are responsible.
We are responsible.
So, hey, good people, we're coming to an end of this part of Tom's visit with us, and there's so much more that he has to offer. So please, tune in to part 2 of Tom's podcast with me. We'll be talking about touch and all of the things that individuals can do to make a difference and plot out their future, as well as the future of the planet. So there's a lot of interesting information to come. So until then, be well and be happy, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you, Tom.
Bye. You're welcome.